All right. Hello, everyone. So we're from DevSecFlow. I'm the CTO. My name is Abdel Fane. So today we're going to talk about CNAMM, Cloud Native Assurance Maturity Model. So, actually, can you continue there?
Sure. So, introduction, Francis Ofungwu. I'm the CEO of DevSecFlow. Abdel and I met about 6 years ago when we came up with this shared vision that cybersecurity should look a lot more like an engineering function than it currently did. We saw a lot of time being spent on governance and compliance analysis while we were working at a consulting firm, and we didn't see true engineering work being evidenced on the cybersecurity side. So this shared vision brought us together, and we formed this company, DevSecFlow, where we're focused on getting cybersecurity teams, compliance teams, and platform teams to really understand exactly what their workflows are, hence the flow in DevSecFlow. We believe that evidencing your workflows will help your conversations go a lot easier when it comes to security conversations or compliance conversations, and we feel this compliance framework, or this cloud native assurance framework, can help drive those discussions.
So I know it's a bit hard to see my profile here, but I've been in cybersecurity for about 15 years now. Spent a good amount of time in consulting. In fact, I guess the last place I consulted was Booz Allen. So while at Booz Allen and previous consulting firm, and Francis mentioned earlier, we met in consulting. So what we kind of began to realize was that Fortune 500 companies that we were consulting seem to all be having the same issue. And as they were having these issues, we kind of thought, hey, there's a problem here. There's no way so many people have the same issues. So how can we possibly come up with a solution to help out this organization? And that's where CNAMM was kind of envisioned from that. So cloud computing was an amazing thing. 15 years ago, the adoption increased. A lot of organizations started adopting cloud. But cloud itself came with its own challenge. Well, first thing is that a lot of people didn't quite understand cloud, right? So we've seen the data breaches, including the US government, misconfiguring the cloud environment, right? So what happened over time is that when these organizations created their environment, they didn't have the right expertise. They didn't have best practices. And while cloud allowed developers to build at lightning speed, things were not being secure at that same speed. So essentially, the last 15 years, issues has been brewing up. Organization, their cloud is fragmented. Developers have built a ton of tools. They've left your company, and these things are essentially sitting around and become an attack surface, right? So while cloud computing was a new innovation, amazing thing, unfortunately, the way we approached it was, in a sense, how we did things the old days, right? So we kind of never innovated from that perspective. So the vision behind our mission was, as we thought about these Fortune 500 companies that we've consulted, and we've seen that they've all shared similar issues, which was that they've been building cloud environment, misconfiguring it, developers build resources, they leave, right? So over time, the environment becomes a little bit messy, right? So the vision behind this mission was, how can we create a framework, something that business leaders, security leaders, as well as engineers, right, they can all use? Because when we think about cybersecurity, most organizations have limited budget, right? That's the reality of things. And chances are you have resources running that are burning your cloud computing costs. So essentially, we came up with Cloud Native Assurance Maturity Model, which allows developers and business leaders to understand where their gaps are across their organization. So you might be thinking, there are frameworks like OAuth SAMM, right? There are other pre-existing frameworks. But what we felt was that there were some missing features within this framework, and that's really what we're trying to address those gaps from those frameworks. So an overview about CNAMM. It is a structured approach to assessing your environment. It consists of 8 business functions 3 practice areas, and a basic and advanced stream. So that's 240 questions, right? Pretty comprehensive. But within the assessment framework itself, these are modularized, right? So we have from our business function covers from strategy and governance down to threat detection and response to resilience and assurance. So 240 questions, a lot of questions, but these are modularized. So you can just focus on one business function that applies to your organization and just focus on that. And you'll notice that we also have something here, a raw score and an adjusted score. So when we look at some of these traditional framework that, that are still relevant much today, they kind of all treat this. When you take their assessment, they treat every single company the same way, right? Healthcare, financial, a nonprofit, they should not be treated the same. So when you take in an assessment framework, your score should differ based on your industry, right? Because we know that a nonprofit may not have such a high security scrutiny versus a healthcare, for example, especially when it comes down to compliance. So what you're really looking at here is the assessment scorecard. So based on how you've answered the question within the assessment, we try to give you an overview of what your environment looks like, right? So for a business leader, this is a way to say, oh, I'm not doing very well in supply chain security. Maybe this is an area that we need to focus our resources on. So a bit about the methodology. The organization profile. So the organization profile is essentially where we capture your organization profile to understand whether you fit in between financial, nonprofit, healthcare, right? So we'll capture things like your organization size, if you have any kind of compliance regulation requirements. This is ultimately what helps us determine that raw score versus adjusted score. Now, as you go through the assessment itself, what you'll notice is that we've added additional details to kind of help you, help you take this assessment, right? So as you answer questions, there will be more information as to what kind of evidence would satisfy for the answer that you've selected. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Francis.
Yeah, so to dig into a little level of detail, so as Abdel mentioned, and I'll go back a couple of slides to evidence this, but as Abdel mentioned, there are 8 business functions, and we wanted to pick on the threat detection and response function to show you how these discussions, because I don't want to say assessments, how these discussions should work. Again, the main goal for this framework is for you to have meaningful discussions with your other stakeholders. It's not a scorecard that you show to an external party or to external auditors. It's for your compliance teams, your platform teams, and your cybersecurity teams to have a common playbook for assessing where you are today. Because what we see when we talk to organizations is you have your cybersecurity teams doing things in silos, your platform teams doing things in silos, and then come audit time, everyone is scrambling to get the same screenshots, the same evidence to prove a control that they've either never discussed before or not, again, on the same page as to how to evidence that control. So this framework will help with those discussions, and because it's based on evidence collection, you may be able to have these discussions and then capture evidence that will make your audit lives a lot easier come those audit times. So again, we're focusing on threat detection and response, and each business function, each of the 8 business functions has 2 streams. If you're familiar with OOP SAM, then you see the same concept. You have a stream A, that is your core capabilities, and then a stream B, that is your advanced capabilities. So if we're looking at threat detection and response, you have your cloud-native threat detection that looks at your baselines and your analytics in terms of how you respond to known threats. And then stream B is for threat hunting and serverless threat detection, as well as things that are advanced in terms of capabilities for your typical threat detection. Same thing for incident response. So you have your automation and investigation services that will be in stream A. In stream B, you have your advanced capabilities like how you get your legal teams involved and do potential purple team drills or attack simulations. And then lastly, for vulnerability management, how are you doing real-time discovery? How is your vulnerability management integrated into your CI/CD pipelines? And then for the advanced stream B, you're looking at things like software bill of materials, driven zero-day protection. So we have an example here what evidence means. And what I'll do just for time's sake is jump into an example where we had a fintech company that operated out of the EU that had significant compliance pressure from DORA. If you're not familiar with DORA, it's the Digital Operations Resilience Act, where response and resilience to cyber threats is a key part of that specific legislation. So with this organization, they did an assessment, and as Abdel mentioned, these business functions are modular. You can just pick one specific business function to focus on. And what they focused on was threat detection and response for the reasons I said earlier. And what they found out was they were at level 2, which is quite mature for most organizations, but because they were a fintech and because of DORA resilience, management and leadership decided level 4 is really where they should be because that's an important function for them. So if we map out the journey of how they went from level 2 to 4, they started level 2 and decided that their AWS Kubernetes environment, their EKS environment, didn't really have any runtime detection capabilities. So they started off by deploying Falco, and using Falco and getting evidence using threat detection rules with Sigma and OpenSearch, they were able to find a way to get more realistic continuous monitoring of their EKS environment and use that data to create a risk-scored vulnerability backlog. This solved a number of problems in the discussions that we're having with the developers and engineering teams, because before this discussion, every vulnerability or every CVS score was being treated as the same. So this gave them a way to integrate their vulnerability backlog into their ticketing system and have a prioritized way of addressing vulnerabilities. It also led into a CI/CD integration play where there were break-in builds that had a CVS score of 9 and above. Personally, that's a little overkill from just a development standpoint, but they insisted that, look, we don't want anything with that score going into production. And they're able to use this framework as a discussion to achieve that level of common understanding with the developers and cybersecurity teams. And then lastly, a lot of this evidence that they collected from these discussions went into their playbooks. So they're able to have very meaningful Slack discussions around incident response, but also use those transcripts as a way to create audit evidence for their auditors looking for how they collaborated during an incident. So this onwards is more forward-looking in terms of what they will do. They do want to get from level 2 to 4, so now when they've gotten to 3, they are planning for level 3 to 4 transformation that requires more advanced things than are typically we do in incident response or threat detection and response organizations. What the standard allows you to do, or what the framework allows you to do, is help you envision what good looks like at these other levels and gives you examples of things that you can implement as part of that transformation. So on the screen, you can see things like threat intel and honeypot management using, I think in this case, they were thinking of using open source tools to deliver this as well. Getting just-in-time access for their incident responders and administrators, something they're not doing today, but with the framework, they can assess what good looks like with that type of implementation. Doing things like purple team attacks or purple team and MITRE mapping to their overall frameworks. And then last but not least, as I mentioned, having that SBON-driven correlation. So if there was a new event or a new 0 day that was launched today that will have a repository of every tagged project and every tagged 5 more minutes, every tagged operation within their system to be able to have a very quick and evidence-driven incident response to that 0 day. So one of the things that we saw as part of their initial transformation was this sense that from a telemetry standpoint, they need to shift as left as possible. With the standard or with the framework, they were able to have discussions with the developers to understand they were not getting any visibility from their CI/CD pipeline. So starting that shift left approach from a telemetry standpoint was important to them and something that they uncovered as part of these discussions. Treating evidence as code, our evidence collection practices today lack maturity in the sense that people are still using screenshots and unverified audit logs as a way to verify things are being done. You have to have your evidence in your pipelines and have the ability to generate that through a pipeline run as opposed to waiting for the auditors to ask for that evidence and then taking a screenshot. We talked about purple teams, so I'm not going to belabor that point, but those data-driven metrics, so what makes sense from a mean time to discovery, a mean time to detect, or mean time to respond to an incident, these specific controls or these specific metrics are part of the framework, and they help you show how you're moving from the different levels that have been outlined. So what's the call to action? We have a link at the end of this presentation. It's just cnamm.org. The whole toolkit is there. You can download it, use it, be part of the community, share improvements. We want people to be as verbose as possible to help us improve the standard. We feel we've done a pretty good job of releasing a version 1, but the next iterations of the standard are all dependent on your help and sort of your visibility in things we're missing. We also feel that the checklist or things that you can do using the standard will help drive those conversations that are very meaningful to your teams because, again, we see a lot of teams operating in silos, and this could be a tabletop exercise to help you bring everyone on the same page. And as I mentioned, here is the link. It has a simple assessment that you can do. There's just 24 questions, but it also has the whole standard that you can download to do these assessments. And as Abdel mentioned, it is very modular. You don't have to do all 8 business functions. You can pick one of the business functions that is really important to you, like software supply chain management or incident response, and use those questions as a way to get on the same page with your teams. With the remaining time, hopefully we can take some questions and maybe scroll back to the actual standard to see if there are any questions on what it looks like as well. Questions? Do we feel this would be useful for your teams, or have we completely missed the mark with the design? I'll take some polite nods as a yes. Okay.
All
I think
right.
that's our time.
Well, if any questions, find them in the hallways. Oh, we got one. All right, hold on. Get my steps in.
Is this, are you working with any, are you working to bring this to any standards body? You mentioned it as a standard, but this is your standard.
Yeah.
Are you working to kind of promote this to any standards body?
We would, and we have, and we sat down with the CNCF a few months ago to talk about adoption through that, and I think that fell short. But we would like to at some point. It's not our main priority. We just want people to use it as a way for driving these discussions, whether it becomes a standard. My feeling that these standards, when they get adopted, almost add to the list of things that audit teams can knock you over the head with, or things that you need to develop a scorecard for. This is not that. This is a maturity framework that helps drive those discussions.